this is update for September 22, 2022, day 211 of the war, end of the date update. I'll provide actually today a little bit economic information, news, and then I'll also provide some initial assessment of this mobilization effort. So going back to economy, because this is the basis, as I said many times, of the war. So there was statistical news released in Ukraine that production of steel in Ukraine in August dropped to 20% of the August of 2021. And just for those who, probably most people don't know, but Ukraine used to be top 10 major producers of steel, and it was slowly dropping because of extremely unwise economic policies by Ukrainian government since the beginning of Ukrainian independence in 1991. But obviously this is due to the war, so essentially this was one of the big sources of the revenue for the government, and then also also export revenue. So basically it was bringing a lot of foreign currency, obviously US dollars or euros, and reflecting that Ukrainian currency is now falling again to 43 Ukrainian hryvnias per $1, pushing 44. Just as a refresher, before war started, it was about 28, 29. So you can see the devaluation is sort of becoming significant. It's also, there are some early signs that there could be bank runs in Ukraine, even though the banks people don't keep money in the banks in general, because during over past 30 years there was multiple times when savings were burned and totally just annihilated in banks. Essentially, the banking system collapsed several times. But nevertheless, some people still hold money in the banks, and one of the largest, the largest bank in Ukraine, called Privatbank, which was nationalized in 2016 and now run by the government, limited withdrawal of foreign currency, mostly US dollars and euros, to 1,000 per day of ISA currency. And then let's switch a little bit to Russia. There is, and so European Union now unblocked export of Russian fertilizers, of Russian coal, lumber, cement, products of oil refining. So as you can see, the common thread in all of these commodities is that they all energy intensive commodities that require a lot of energy, well, with the exception of lumber. So that obviously probably is a result of the general inflationary situation and the realization that trying to tame inflation by monetary measures, by increasing interest rates, will create extreme level of pain in the Western world, which start to show up in US and probably will start to show up in Europe pretty soon. So so there is probably some realization that the problem is in supply side, not in demand side, because demand is not higher than 2019 in generally in the world, right? And at that time there were no shortages, there were no problems overall. Everything was sort of more or less in balance. Actually, demand was actually slowing down and falling. So there was actually opposite situation where we were going into recession at the end of 2019. So that's probably gonna provide some relief eventually to the global commodity prices. May not happen soon. Now let's discuss this whole mobilization effort in Russia, and sort of first initial take on this, on the how it's going. So if you remember, I showed you those kind of like layers, right, of draft, or sort of sequence. So that the drafting is completely random actually. The system in Russia doesn't seem to be working at all. So even, I always kind of refer to the Soviet system as pretty bad. Soviet system was much better than what sort of we observing in Russia, where it's just random calls, like so people who not supposed to be called into army, such as like military factory workers, they getting draft notices. Then people who have zero experience, like actual military experience, because I think if you are if you go to university in Russia, you kind of like have like military education, but don't you don't have sort of hands-on experience at all. So it's kind of like theoretical only. So those people getting called at the same time, people who actually there are some people who volunteer. To be fair, they show up and they have military experience, and they not being drafted, they being turned down. This is an amazing system. That's And then there are also some cracks, regional cracks. So the head of Chechnya, which is in North Caucasus, it's kind of here. The head of Chechnya said that they're not gonna sort of provide people to for the draft. He was citing reasons that they already participated in in this war and so on. There is some sort of fairness to his words. At the same time, those units were not on the sort of first line for the most part. And so again, the sort of idea was actually to to pull those people with military experience who were sort of essentially refusing to go to war because they don't see point in it. And it's actually totally backfires, totally works in a totally different way. And what this really means is that potentially Russia could have gotten actually better troops than what they have right now if they did it right. Because if they call those experienced people with experience, uh, those people tend to be actually better than what they have currently on the front line. For the simple logic is very simple. People who sort of more intelligent, they go into the army, they realize it's about bureaucracy, and they serve their sort of contract term, they learn, and they sort of leave. They don't stay there. And those people, because in on the battlefield, what is decisive factor is personal sort of IQ level, right? And so that's people who have that plus military training. So that's sort of ideal sort of soldiers. Uh, and some of them actually turns out to be motivated. So when there's a call, and they sort of willing to go. Some of them, not all of them. But what turns out to be happening is that this is just totally random sort of random number generator, random people completely sort of irrelevant and completely unmotivated. So it's going to be hodgepodge of these troops. Some of them will be motivated by just accident. Some of them will be totally not motivated again by accident. So everything is going to be by accident. In many ways, totally unpredictable how it's going to play out. At the same time, also I mentioned that per law, people are not allowed to leave their regions or the place where they live, basically. So there was some announcement by, I think, Russian Ministry of Tourism saying that, like, oh, you can travel, no problem, you can go wherever you are. So it does look like that it's still sort of there is still some relative freedom within Russia, at least, to know to what extent people can leave Russia. So that's sort of kind of like a general updates. Now let's do sort of let's look into military situation on the ground. So as we always do in a clockwise fashion. So starting from the very north. So situation along the state border is somewhat quieter, I would say. Actually, quite quieter on relative scale. Obviously, it's not quiet, but quieter. Now let's move. Let's actually look at what's going on North Luhansk section of the front line. There's actually quite a bit of developments here. So there are sort of two things happening at the same time. Russian troops trying to destroy Ukrainian bridgehead on the eastern side of Oskil River in Kupiansk here. At the same time, Ukrainian troops finally sort of bridged major Russian defensive line, which we wouldn't even call it truly defensive line. It was kind of like hastily made defensive position. There was not truly, very well sort of engineered positions. But nevertheless, it took Ukrainian troops about 7-10 days to achieve that. But so they established, they essentially starting to move on the eastern side of Oskil River, and this is probably what this also means is that Russia is desperately low on infantry, on pretty much everything to sort of man all of this many kilometers of the front line, and they just eventually it breaks if you don't. And that also highlights that this mobilization decision was forced decision essentially, because there is no other option, or the whole thing will collapse. As I said about 10 days ago, 14 days ago, there is no other choice for the Russian leadership. So let's look where it is right now. So again, the major move was from this village Oskil. Ukrainian troops moved, captured all the way to Lozove here, captured Korovyachyy Yar, moved to Karpivka, tried to attack with Kodub. They were repelled there. So essentially, and again, this is just sort of recent developments. Everything is extremely fluid, so it's even unclear what's going on in this village, Alexandrovka. Probably it being sort of abandoned by Russian troops at this point. Unclear what's going on even in this Chandrigolova, even though I mark it as controlled by Russian side, but things are extremely fluid. But the key point is Ukrainian troops sort of breached Russian line in a major way. So this puts this whole situation around Lyman in somewhat uncomfortable situation. How quickly it deteriorates to extremely uncomfortable, we'll see. But given the whole sort of suddenness of move, it's probably there is a big hole basically in Russian defensive lines. And so it remains to be seen how quickly Ukrainian troops will be able to liberate Lyman, but it's definitely sort of on horizon. But the main point here, and this is actually so this is where the front line sort of stopped after initial Ukrainian offensive that helped to liberate this area between the rivers, essentially, with the exception of this corner, which was controlled by Ukrainian army from the beginning. So this area between the rivers was liberated, and then the essentially front line has stopped, right? So this was September 15. So this is where it looks at this point. So as you can see, there is a decent bridgehead. I mean, it's at this point it's looking very promising, and the main obviously goal of this is Svatove, and then Starobilsk is the next one. So it may happen, and then even more sort of dangerous move would be to actually turn and attack towards Donetsk, essentially create extreme danger for all of these Russian troops who are on this near Lysychansk, and actually even all the way to Bakhmut. So that's why I was saying. So when let's actually move and let's see what's going on there in this that section of the front line. This is this area, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. So this is all now being threatened, and that's why I was saying that all of those attacks south of Bakhmut and even at Soledar and Bakhmut are, in a way, pointless attacks that actually pull Russian troops more in a deeper pocket, potentially down the road, or basically wasting resources where they need resources to actually sort of kind of maintain the collapsing front north of, let's say, Bakhmut, right? Eventually. So, so for that reason, as you can see, the situation on this section of the front line was quite quiet in terms of there were no Russian attacks. They didn't attack Bakhmut, Soledar. Apparently, the Wagner mercenaries are moving up north. We don't know the whole extent of the moves, but it's very clear there is some moves underway on the Russian side. So they were pretty weak, small attacks here. Zaporizhya and Korovyachyy Yar, traditional, but again, you can see that it affects the whole. Even sort of now, Russian sort of command understands very clearly that it's the danger has started to develop. It's in very early stages, and it's possible to prevent it. But then if you need to scramble every resource you can have, and if you do that, which is Wagner mercenaries, is the most battle capable at this point unit, or I would say it's organization, probably is better to say it. So what this really means, this whole thing will stop eventually, as they will need them up there to stem Ukrainian advances in order not to lose, not to have a collapse of the front line there. Now let's move south. Let's see what's going on the central Donbass section of front line. Here things also completely stopped. Any Russian attacks stopped. Again, for the same reason, Russia needs to create some reserves, so they need to sort of thin out existing front lines to pull sort of resources from those, because they still don't have those mobilized people, and who knows when some of them will be definitely sent straight, from this mobilization office straight to the front line, even though it was promised that they will go through the training. But the situation is getting pretty desperate for the Russian command, so they will just throw them just to plug the holes at this point, no matter what the costs are going to be. They will sort of think about the cost later. So this was again quiet, and probably some of the units or even sort of consolidated like groups are being created and moved to north to sort of prevent collapse of the front line there. Then let's move south and actually west. Let's see what's going on Zaporizhya front line. Things here are quiet. It's been this whole front line been quiet since probably end of April. Generally speaking, there are some activities from time to time, but it's again pretty quiet. Then let's finish with the Kherson bridgehead. Here things are more or less the same. Nothing major going on in terms of changing, positions. Ukrainian side continues attacks against their ferries and pontoon bridges, essentially minimizing supply of everything to Russian troops here. Again, there's going to be deaths by 1,000 cuts. It's not going to be quick. I explained, I think yesterday, why Ukrainian army still does not know how to do attacks, and this is the case here. So it will be done by actually starving Russian troops, making them sort of difficult to defend, basically lacking ammunition to defend and supplies in general. So that's how it's gonna probably happen here, unless there is this big push, some kind of like large scale attack. But we don't see how this is gonna happen here, meaning from the from mobilized sort of soldiers. But we don't think that's happening. I forgot to mention one more point. Russian side forces are actually continuing attacks against the energy infrastructure. So it does look like they hit some power substation, basically a bunch of transformers somewhere in Zaporizhya area. And what we're seeing, it's also we don't have enough explanation, but it seems that more than usual Ukrainian power generators are sort of being idled. The reason being there is no good explanation. We feel like it's rationalization why. We're unclear if it's just the whole energy system become unstable because there's too much damage to it. It's somewhat unclear why that is happening, but there's a very clear observation that many power generator units are being idled, and those units in Ukraine, most of them, and I'm referring to the ones that are using coal to generate power, not talking about the nuclear ones. The Zaporizhya nuclear power station at this point idled here in Enerhodar, which, just a reminder, was major leading producer of electricity in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Thank you for support. And until tomorrow. Bye bye.